Cambridge is cold in December. As a student there, I was often to be found huddled in my little room, studying with a blanket around me in those freezing winter months. The high point of this time was the last week of term before the Christmas holiday. For 3 blissful days before I returned home, we were free from lectures and assignments. On that last day, my friends and I would gather in the common room, light the fire, break out the wine, and tell ghost stories as soon as the lights were low. This was a tradition we established from my first year onwards, in honour of M.R. James, a provost of King's College, and an esteemed writer of ghost stories. But this last winter I did not take part in the festivities. I stayed in my room, dreading the coming days when I would have to return home. It was not always so. I was very close to my parents. Indeed, I now believe I was perhaps the one thing that kept them together. I was an only child, and though I was very happy, I can recall the long silences between them, the arguments when they thought I was out of earshot. When I went home at the end of my first term at Cambridge, I immediately noticed the change. They welcomed me warmly, of course, but something in their behaviour told me things were not well between them. Perhaps that is why I hadn't visited during the 8 weeks. It is possible that deep down I was afraid of what I would come back to. The first few days were tolerable enough, but as the excitement of my homecoming died down, I witnessed once again the silences and heard harsh words exchanged that I was not meant to hear. I was already missing my student friends, and fearing what the stress of a family Christmas would do to the already strained relations between my parents. Desperate for a distraction, I wrote to Michael, my best friend at university, and invited him to join us for a few days. To my relief he accepted, and caught a train down the next day. I thought a visitor would break the tense atmosphere, and give me time away from my family, since I would be playing the host. The night he arrived we stayed up late discussing various topics. As midnight neared, he asked if I could keep a secret. I said yes, of course, though something in his manner made me think he was not referring to the usual trivial things students talk about. He rummaged in his bag and pulled out a slip of very old, very brown parchment. This he passed to me, and I was confronted with what appeared to be a map. Despite its great age, I recognized some of the landmarks as belonging to my hometown. Around the edges of the map was scrawled in untidy ink handwriting a series of numbers. Coordinates, perhaps. I looked at Michael. He was grinning. He said, "That is a real-life treasure map." I laughed, but his expression became deadly serious. "What if it's all true?" he said. "The old stories of buried treasure and secretive maps." He told me he had found it in the old Cambridge library, tucked away among a collection of old constabulary reports. The book containing the map had been donated to the library many years ago, and claimed to have been found in the possessions of Jacob Shearer. My eyes widened. There is no one in my town who hasn't heard of the infamous Jacob Shearer. He was a particularly violent highway robber, who is said to have stolen nearly £2,000 over 2 years in the 1700s. He was caught and hanged in the end, but his loot was never found. There were rumours he had buried it, but no evidence ever turned up. If the map in my hand was truly the real thing, I wondered how it could have gone uncovered so long. Michael said some of the stories claimed Shearer had placed a curse on the treasure, so perhaps whoever hid the map in Cambridge had been afraid. I asked him why he was telling me all this. He replied that he wanted my help to find the treasure, to see if the map was genuine. £2,000 in the 18th century would be worth a fortune now. He had wanted to tell me as soon as he found the map, since he knew I lived in Shearer's hometown, but the right time had never come. Then I had invited him here myself, and so it seemed Providence shone upon us. I confess I did not believe this was a real treasure map, but I was looking for a distraction, and a treasure hunt did not seem a bad way to waste time. The next day we set out on our expedition. We took spades and a compass like real explorers. The coordinates on the map led us to an area of town known to the locals simply as the Wasteland. I had no trouble believing it had been thus since Shearer's time. It is a dark, boggy place. The ground is too soft to build on, so it has gone virtually untouched since people first came to these parts. Few people go there, for there are areas where the bog is so dense that a wrong step could send you sinking down into the mud, there to stay. The map took us through the wasteland to a place where the ground was firmer, but so overgrown that we had to fight our way through weeds and thick bushes. At last we stood on the spot. We dug for nearly an hour. I was beginning to suggest we give it up and go home, when Michael's spade struck something solid. He gave a shout and began to dig with his hands. I got on my knees to help, and soon we had unearthed a small metal box. The lid was rusted shut, so Michael took his Swiss Army knife and used it as a lever. At last the lid sprang open, revealing its contents. A mess of gold coins, pearl necklaces, and little jewels greeted our eyes. I looked at Michael and saw my own astonishment reflected back at me. The stories were true, the map was real, and we were rich. Covered in dirt but exhilarated, we closed the chest and carried it with us back through the wasteland. I looked back once and thought I saw a figure watching us, but it was too dark to tell if it was real or a shadow. We agreed to tell no one of our discovery until the time was right. I assumed Michael meant when the holidays were over, but truth be told I was too elated to mind. For the first time since coming home I felt really happy, and the future seemed bright. That night I lay in bed wondering how much the treasure would be worth, and what I could buy with it, when I thought I heard a sound like soft laughter. I sat up and looked at the bedroom door. In the dim light I could swear there was someone standing right outside. The chuckle came again, a little louder. "Michael?" I said. The floorboards creaked as the unseen person walked away from my door towards Michael's room. I was concerned, but not overly alarmed at this point. I got out of bed and opened the door, expecting to see Michael in the passage. There was no one there, yet the door to his room was open. I went in and saw his bed was empty, the sheets ruffled as if he had just got up. I assumed he had gone to the bathroom. As I turned to leave, I happened to glance out of the window and stopped dead. A figure I recognized as Michael was walking at a rigorous pace away from the house. Even in the dim light I could see he wore nothing but his white pajamas. His feet were bare. I opened the window and called out to him, but he was already out of earshot, receding into the distance. I turned to pursue when a thought occurred to me. I looked under the bed where we had hidden the treasure chest. The chest was gone. I threw on my coat and a pair of boots and ran out into the night. My heart was pounding, for I knew the direction in which Michael had been heading. He was going to the wasteland, and he had taken the chest with him. I reached the wasteland out of breath and increasingly fearful. I had brought a torch, but it only showed a few steps ahead, and I dared not go too far in case I stepped in one of the places where the ground sinks. I called out for Michael, but received no reply. I walked forward carefully, casting the torchlight frantically around. At last I spotted him. He was standing illuminated in the moonlight, halfway across the waste. I realized with a cold shock he was right in the most dangerous spot, the kind our parents and teachers used to warn us about at school. He was beyond the warning sign, just standing there looking down at something in his hands. I called his name again. He turned slowly as if in a trance, and I saw he was holding the chest, cradling it like a child. He looked at me, a curious smile on his face. He took a step towards me, and then I heard the hideous sucking sound, and he stumbled. The ground became liquid beneath him, and he disappeared under. The poor guy had no time to scream. The treasure chest went with him, and in seconds I was alone in the wasteland. I turned to run home and get help, when I saw my path was blocked. A man stood watching me. He was dressed all in black, and wore a smile on his face so hateful and so malevolent that I could not move. Then he turned and strode away, and vanished into the moonlight. Michael's body was never found. They dredged the wasteland as best they could, but the ground moves so much that once lost, nothing can be recovered. The treasure is gone too. I burned the map and have never told anyone the real reason why Michael was out there. I don't truly know myself, but I can guess. The man I saw that night was Jacob Shearer, or whatever is left of him. and Michael died so his treasure will remain buried forever. My parents separated not long after. I rarely go home now, not just because the home I remember is shattered, but because I cannot visit that town without thinking of Michael trapped down there in the bog. And I cannot partake in ghost stories, however innocent or outlandish, because I am reminded of that last terrible Christmas and the thing that haunts my hometown.